A terrified little boy cried for help at a crowded charity gala. The moment a curvy housekeeper rushed to save him, powerful voices accused her of kidnapping. Then New York's most feared mafia boss looked everyone in the eye and said, "She's my wife." But that shocking lie was only the beginning. Hidden behind their fake marriage was a decades-old conspiracy, a buried family secret, and a truth so dangerous it would change both of their lives forever. Stay with me until the very end, because every answer uncovers an even greater betrayal. The crystal chandeliers above Damian Knight's oceanfront mansion painted the charity gala in warm gold, but Emily Carter barely noticed them. 3 weeks into her job as a housekeeper, she kept her eyes on polished floors and half-finished champagne glasses, knowing people like her were expected to stay invisible. As she carried a tray toward the west hallway, a muffled cry stopped her cold. A little boy struggled between two men wearing catering uniforms, his small hands reaching toward the ballroom while they hurried him toward a service exit. Emily set the tray down without thinking. "Hey, you're hurting him." One man flashed a practiced smile. "Family matter." The boy shook his head so violently that she saw pure terror in his eyes. Emily stepped between them, wrapped one arm around the child, and pulled him back. Guests turned as silverware clinked against china. Before she could explain, Richard Hayes strode across the marble floor, grabbed her wrist, and thundered, "This woman is kidnapping the boy!" Conversations died instantly. Cameras lifted. Emily's heart pounded as dozens of strangers stared at the curvy black housekeeper like she already belonged in handcuffs. She tried to speak, but Richard tightened his grip. "I found him," she said. "They were taking him outside." "Liar." The boy buried his face against her shoulder, trembling too hard to answer. Heavy footsteps echoed from the grand staircase. Damian Knight descended without rushing, every eye following him instead. His tailored black suit, calm expression, and silent bodyguards cleared a path through the crowd before anyone moved. He studied the frightened child, Richard's hand around Emily's wrist, then Emily's steady eyes refusing to look away despite her fear. His voice was quiet enough to freeze the room. "Take your hand off my wife." Silence crashed over the ballroom. Richard's fingers loosened. Emily stared at Damian, unable to breathe. She had cleaned his office, dusted his library, and served coffee outside board meetings, but they had never shared more than a polite nod. She wasn't his wife, so why had the most feared man in the room just claimed she was? Emily's pulse refused to slow as Damian stepped beside her. Without raising his voice, he nodded toward Richard Hayes. "The gala is over. My guests deserve a peaceful evening." No one argued. Richard released her wrist with a cold smile that promised the story was far from finished, while the two fake caterers disappeared before security reached the west hallway. The frightened boy clung to Damian the moment they entered the mansion's private library, overlooking the Pacific. Shelves of dark walnut surrounded them, and waves crashed softly beyond the glass walls. "This is Noah," Damian said. "My nephew, the last child carrying the Knight name." Emily finally understood why the room downstairs had turned into a battlefield. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I know." Noah looked up at her with watery eyes. "Thank you for not letting them take me." The simple words hit harder than the accusations she had endured. After Marcus Reed escorted Noah upstairs, Damian remained by the fireplace. "Those men saw your face. Richard Hayes saw you protect Noah. If I had called you an employee, they would have assumed you were disposable." Emily folded her arms. "So, you called me your wife." I called you someone they would think twice about touching. She let out a tired laugh. That doesn't sound much safer. It isn't. The honesty caught her off guard. Damian slid a folder across the antique desk. Inside was a 30-day agreement. She would publicly remain his wife until a shipping alliance was finalized, and whoever ordered Noah's kidnapping was exposed. In return, her mother would receive round-the-clock protection, and Emily could walk away whenever she chose. She studied every page before picking up the pen. As she signed, one signature already on the document stopped her cold. The witness had formed the letter R, with the same unusual stroke she remembered from the paperwork that had cost her the hotel job years earlier. Emily slowly looked back at Damian. Someone connected to that old betrayal was already inside his world. She slipped the thought into the back of her mind. This was neither the time nor the place to accuse anyone. By sunrise, she had moved from the employee's wing into a guest suite overlooking the cliffs, a room so elegant it felt borrowed from someone else's life. The staff greeted her politely, but whispers followed every step she took through the marble hallways. So that's the new Mrs. Knight? She was carrying a mop last week. Emily pretended not to hear. She had learned years ago that answering every insult only gave it more life. That afternoon, she returned to the mansion kitchen, hoping familiar work would quiet her thoughts. Instead, she found a young server named Lily standing in tears beside a shattered crystal serving bowl worth thousands of dollars. The head kitchen manager pointed at her with open contempt. She ruined it. Take it out of her paycheck. Lily kept shaking her head. I didn't even touch it. Emily knelt beside the broken glass instead of joining the argument. Tiny wheel marks crossed a trail of spilled cream, leading straight toward a heavy supply cart parked several feet away. One wheel was cracked. She stood and calmly rolled the cart forward. The damaged wheel caught the uneven tile, tipping another empty tray exactly the same way. The bowl wasn't dropped, Emily said quietly. The cart hit the table. The room fell silent. The manager's face drained of color. Lily looked at Emily as though no one had ever believed her before. From the second-floor balcony, Damian watched without saying a word. He had expected fear, complaints, maybe even resentment after the night before. Instead, the woman everyone underestimated solved the problem by noticing what everyone else ignored. As employees slowly returned to work, Damian turned to Marcus Reed. Review every camera near this kitchen. Marcus frowned. Because of the broken bowl? Damian kept his eyes on Emily below. No. Because someone deleted exactly 10 minutes from the hallway camera last night. For the first time, he wondered if the woman pretending to be his wife had noticed far more than she was saying. 2 mornings later, Emily stood beside Damian inside the glass-walled boardroom of Knight Logistics, 40 stories above Manhattan. Rain streaked the windows while cargo ships crawled across the gray Hudson in the distance. She had been invited for one reason only, to appear as Mrs. Knight long enough to silence rumors surrounding the gala. She intended to remain invisible. Instead, her eyes drifted across the conference table. A senior advisor wore his watch on the opposite wrist from the charity dinner. The corporate secretary kept hiding a blue ink stain beneath her thumb. Most people would never notice either detail. Emily couldn't stop noticing them. Then her gaze landed on the digital shipping map projected across the wall. 2 coordinates had changed. Only 2 numbers. Barely enough to catch anyone's attention. Damian accepted a fountain pen from his attorney and prepared to approve the multi-million-dollar shipment bound for Newark Harbor. Wait. Every executive turned toward Emily. She immediately wished she had stayed quiet. "I'm sorry," she said, "but those coordinates weren't there before." One director chuckled. "You can read maritime routes now?" Emily ignored him and stepped closer to the screen. "If those numbers stay like this, the trucks won't reach the secured terminal. They'll be redirected through an industrial zone." Marcus quickly checked the route on his tablet. His expression hardened. "She's right." Within seconds, technicians confirmed that someone had altered the destination inside the encrypted system less than an hour earlier. The room fell into stunned silence. Damian calmly closed the folder instead of signing it. "Cancel today's shipment." Several executives protested at once. "That delay will cost millions." "It may," Damian replied, "but sending my people into a trap would cost far more." He looked directly at Emily. "From now on, if she speaks during my meetings, everyone listens." No one argued again. As chairs scraped across the polished floor and the meeting dissolved into urgent phone calls, Emily gathered her notebook. Passing the doorway, she caught Damian's private attorney typing a message before quickly hiding his phone. She had read only 5 words. She remembers far too much. Emily pretended she had seen nothing. She slipped her notebook into her purse and followed Marcus Reed to the elevator while the boardroom buzzed with anxious voices. Whoever had sent that message was already afraid of something she didn't even understand yet. That evening, cold rain washed over Manhattan. Damian's penthouse overlooked a city glowing beneath sheets of silver water, but inside, every room felt strangely empty. Emily had planned to leave him alone until she heard glass shatter from the living room. She hurried inside. A crystal tumbler lay broken across the hardwood floor. Damian stood beside the fireplace, one hand bleeding where sharp fragments had cut his palm. His phone still displayed a report from Marcus. Another night convoy had been ambushed outside Philadelphia. The drivers escaped, but millions of dollars worth of cargo had vanished. Emily quietly opened the first aid kit. "You don't have to do that," Damian said without looking at her. "I know." She gently wrapped a clean bandage around his hand. "Holding everything together doesn't mean you have to bleed for it." For a long moment, only the rain tapped against the windows. "My father believed family came before power," Damian finally said. "His own brother sold him out during a negotiation. He never recovered from it." Emily finished tying the bandage. "My father didn't betray me with money," she answered softly. He just left. One day he walked out while my mother was sick and never looked back. After a while, you stop expecting people to stay." Damian met her eyes for the first time that evening. "You still helped Noah." He was scared. "You still defended Lily." She was innocent. "You always see people before you see yourself." Emily smiled sadly. "Maybe that's because nobody bothered seeing me." The next morning, the kitchen manager who had falsely accused Lily was quietly dismissed, and Lily returned to work with full pay. Before leaving for another meeting, Damian gave Marcus one simple instruction. Nothing involving Emily happens without her consent. Hours later, a private jet landed at Knight Airfield. A tall woman in an elegant white coat stepped onto the runway, removed her sunglasses, and smiled as cameras flashed. "I heard Damian married the housekeeper." Her name was Victoria Hayes. She stepped through the private terminal as though the city belonged to her. Elegant without trying, carrying only a leather briefcase, Victoria greeted Damian with a polite smile instead of an embrace. The cameras waiting outside captured every second. To the public, she was a respected corporate attorney. Inside New York's most powerful circles, everyone knew she had once been the woman expected to marry Damian Knight. Emily stood several feet away, suddenly aware that she didn't belong in tailored suits and private jets. Victoria crossed the distance and offered her hand. "So you're Emily. I've heard quite a lot about you." There was no sarcasm in her voice, which somehow made Emily even more uneasy. That evening, Damian hosted a quiet dinner at a rooftop restaurant overlooking Manhattan. Candlelight reflected across the windows, while yellow taxis crawled through the streets below, like streams of gold. Victoria never questioned the marriage. Instead, she asked Emily about her mother, her neighborhood in South Los Angeles, and the hotels where she had worked. Then, almost casually, she set down her wine glass. "Did your mother ever mention working for my family?" Emily froze. "My mother cleaned houses." Victoria slowly shook her head. "Not exactly." She explained that years ago, Emily's mother had briefly worked for Hayes International before disappearing after being accused of stealing confidential company files. Emily's appetite vanished. "My mother never stole anything." "I hope you're right," Victoria answered gently. "Records don't always tell the whole story." For the rest of dinner, Emily barely spoke. Back at the Malibu mansion, a garment box waited outside her room with a handwritten note. "For tomorrow night's reception. I thought this color would suit you." Victoria inside rested a beautiful navy evening gown. Emily smiled despite herself, but as she lifted the dress toward the light, something unusual caught her eye. A tiny stitch along the inner lining looked newer than the others. Curious, she carefully loosened the thread. A paper-thin listening device slipped into her hand. Emily's heartbeat quickened. The gift had never been a kindness. Someone wanted every private conversation inside Damian Knight's home. Emily wrapped the tiny listening device in a clean handkerchief and waited until dawn before asking Marcus Reed to meet her in the mansion's security office. Banks of glowing monitors filled the room with pale blue light as rain tapped softly against the windows. Marcus examined the device without touching it. "This isn't something bought online," he said. "Someone with resources planted it." "Can you trace it?" "I'll try, but don't mention this to anyone." Emily nodded, unaware that events were already moving faster than either of them imagined. By afternoon, Knight Logistics was in chaos. News spread that confidential financial records had been stolen from the company's encrypted servers. Before investigators could finish searching the network, another report arrived from Newark Harbor. One of Damian's most trusted bodyguards had been found dead beside an empty cargo dock. The atmosphere inside the mansion changed instantly. Phones rang without stopping. Security teams rushed through the halls. Every employee was questioned. Then Marcus quietly entered Damian's office carrying a tablet. The stolen files were downloaded from a computer inside the house. Emily felt a chill before he finished speaking. "It came from your room." She stared at the screen in disbelief. "That's impossible." Marcus wanted to believe her, but the digital records pointed to her login credentials. Worse still, security footage showed someone entering Damian's office shortly after midnight, wearing clothing identical to hers. Emily watched the video twice. The woman's face never appeared. Only the same sweater, the same height, the same hairstyle. It had been planned. Damian dismissed everyone except Emily. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. "You think I did this?" she finally asked. His silence hurt more than any accusation. "I don't know what to think." Those 7 words shattered something inside her. Slowly, Emily slipped the wedding ring from her finger and placed it on the desk between them. "I've lived my whole life being blamed because I was the easiest person to blame," she whispered. I can survive strangers doubting me." Her eyes filled, but her voice never shook. "I just can't survive living in the house of someone who does." She walked away before he could answer. Halfway down the long driveway, her phone rang. It was Noah, crying so hard he could barely breathe. "Emily, I saw the guard they said was dead." She stopped walking. "He got into Victoria's car." Emily's grip tightened around her phone. "Noah, listen to me. Are you safe?" Marcus answered before the boy could. "He's with me now." Relief washed over her, but only for a moment. She turned around, not because Damian had doubted her, because Noah had trusted her. Within an hour, Emily met Marcus in a quiet parking garage beneath one of Knight Logistics' office towers. Noah repeated exactly what he had seen. The bodyguard everyone believed had died at Newark Harbor had climbed into a black sedan driven by Victoria's security team. Marcus's face hardened. "Cole Mercer. The victim?" "No," Marcus replied quietly. "The man we found was wearing Cole's identification. Whoever planned this wanted us chasing the wrong ghost." Before they could report everything to Damian, another invitation arrived. Victoria Hayes had organized a charity gala inside New York's most luxurious hotel. Every major business network would be there. So would the media. Emily knew immediately it was a trap. The ballroom glittered beneath crystal lights as television cameras lined the walls. Victoria welcomed guests with effortless grace before turning toward Emily. "I think everyone deserves honesty." A giant screen lit up behind her. Images of Emily's employment records appeared first, then copies of the fake marriage agreement. Finally came an old criminal report accusing Emily's mother of stealing confidential Hayes documents decades earlier. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Victoria never raised her voice. This woman entered the Knight family under false pretenses. She gained access to private information, manipulated a frightened child, and deceived one of New York's most respected businessmen. Reporters immediately surrounded Emily. Questions flew from every direction. She stood alone beneath hundreds of flashing cameras. Then the ballroom doors opened. Damian walked straight through the crowd. He stopped beside Emily before facing the microphones. "The marriage began as my decision," he said calmly, "not hers." Silence settled over the room. "If anyone believes deception occurred, hold me responsible." Victoria's smile faded. Damian continued, "No one will use Emily Carter as the price for my choices." He gently offered Emily his arm, not as an order, as a choice. She accepted. As they walked away together, Damian leaned close enough that only she could hear him. "The file about your mother," his voice dropped lower, "is real." Emily's heart sank, but the crime inside it was manufactured. She looked at him in stunned silence. If her mother had been framed, then someone had buried the truth for decades. Emily barely slept before insisting they leave at sunrise. Damian canceled every meeting without explanation, and Marcus drove them north through mist-covered highways toward a weathered farmhouse in rural Connecticut. It had belonged to Emily's grandmother before standing empty for nearly 20 years. Her mother had always refused to return, saying only that some doors were better left closed. The old place looked frozen in time. Dust covered every shelf. Family photographs leaned crooked against faded wallpaper. Afternoon sunlight slipped through cracked curtains, painting long golden lines across worn wooden floors. Emily wandered quietly from room to room until she stopped inside a tiny study. "I remember this desk," she whispered. "Mom never let me open it." The lock had rusted beyond repair. Marcus pried it loose with a pocket tool. Inside were faded tax records, handwritten journals, and dozens of receipts from Hayes International dated almost 30 years earlier. Emily carefully unfolded each page. None mentioned theft. Instead, they documented suspicious payments moving through shell companies and offshore accounts. "This wasn't housekeeping," Damian said. Emily slowly nodded. "My mother wasn't cleaning their offices." She lifted another folder. "She was auditing them." Marcus spread the documents across the desk, arranging dates and signatures. Every page pointed toward a massive money laundering operation hidden behind legitimate business contracts. Then Emily noticed something odd. One floorboard beneath the desk sat slightly higher than the others. She knelt and pressed against the edge. The board lifted. Beneath it rested a small metal box wrapped in yellowed cloth. Inside lay a black leather ledger. Every illegal transfer was recorded by hand. Every payment, every false company, every witness. Near the final pages, one familiar signature stopped all three of them cold. Elias Knight. Damian stared without speaking. "My uncle." His voice faded. "He handled our family's finances after my father died." Emily turned another page. The ledger connected Hayes International to years of stolen shipments, fabricated criminal cases, and bribed officials. Her mother's name appeared only once. Status: refused to approve false audit. Remove credibility immediately. Emily closed her eyes. Her mother had never been a thief. She had been the first person who tried to expose them. Marcus suddenly reached for his radio. "Boss," Static answered first, then a frightened security officer. "Sir, your uncle has called every family captain to an emergency alliance meeting tonight." Damian looked down at the ledger. For the first time in years, he knew exactly who had been sitting behind the betrayal. The drive back to New York passed in silence. Rain blurred the windshield, while the city slowly rose from the horizon like a fortress waiting for war. Damian never loosened his grip on the leather ledger. Every mile erased another excuse he had made for the uncle who had raised him after his father's death. By sunset, the Knight estate had transformed into the site of an emergency alliance meeting. Black sedans lined the entrance. Armed guards filled the gardens. Leaders from every family waited inside the grand ballroom, believing they had gathered to renew old loyalties. Only Damian knew the meeting itself had become the perfect place for an execution. Marcus intercepted them before they reached the entrance. "Our surveillance team searched the guest list," he whispered. "Several security contractors were hired under fake identities. They're already inside." Damian glanced toward the crowded mansion. "So are the assassins." He quietly ordered Marcus to move Noah into the estate's underground safe room. Emily immediately looked up. "There isn't enough time." Damian frowned. "What do you mean?" She unfolded the estate blueprint that had been stored inside the old ledger. Most of the ink had faded, but one section remained clear beneath the original foundation. "There." She pointed below the ballroom. "A maintenance tunnel." Marcus stared at the drawing. "This passage doesn't exist on modern blueprints." "It existed when the mansion was built," Emily replied. "Someone erased it later." Without waiting, the three hurried beneath the estate through an abandoned service staircase hidden behind the wine cellar. Cold air drifted through narrow stone corridors untouched for decades. Rusted pipes crossed the ceiling while shallow water reflected the glow of their flashlights. Halfway through the tunnel, Emily stopped. Fresh boot prints covered the dust. They were here today. Another 20 yards ahead, Marcus froze. Explosives. Military-grade charges had been wired beneath the ballroom supports, their timers connected to a remote receiver instead of a clock. Damian slowly exhaled. The alliance meeting was never about peace. Emily looked toward the ceiling, where hundreds of guests now stood only a few feet above them. If those charges go off, the Knight family dies tonight. At that exact moment, Damian's phone vibrated. The caller ID displayed only one name, Elias Knight. When Damian answered, his uncle's calm voice echoed through the tunnel. "I hope you're enjoying the reunion." Then the line went dead. Far above them, applause erupted as the alliance ceremony officially began. For one frozen heartbeat, no one moved. Then Marcus dropped to one knee beside the explosives. His flashlight swept across bundles of military-grade charges wired into the mansion's oldest support beams. The detonators were linked by fiber cables disappearing deeper into the tunnel. "They aren't timed," Marcus said. "Someone has to trigger them." Damian looked toward the ceiling where hundreds of guests, allies, and innocent staff stood unaware. "Elias wants witnesses." A frightened voice suddenly echoed through Damian's phone. It was Noah. "Uncle Damian, they took me." The line dissolved into static before another voice replaced it. "Victoria. If you want the boy alive, come alone?" Emily's blood ran cold. Damian turned without hesitation. "I'm getting Noah." "You'll walk straight into their trap," Emily said. "I don't have a choice." She stepped between him and the tunnel. "Yes, you do." Before either man could stop her, Emily grabbed the old blueprint from Marcus's hands. The original plans show another branch. She pointed toward a narrow stone passage almost hidden behind collapsed brickwork. "It leads beneath the east garden." Marcus shoved aside loose rubble, revealing a passage barely wide enough to crawl through. Fresh air drifted inside. They used this route. Emily didn't wait for permission. She squeezed into the darkness with only a flashlight. The tunnel narrowed until she could barely breathe. Mud covered her hands while ancient pipes groaned overhead. Ahead, faint voices echoed through the confined space. She extinguished the light. Through a cracked stone wall, she saw Noah tied to a chair inside an abandoned pump room. Two armed men guarded him, while Victoria watched silently from the shadows. Emily searched the room with the same careful eyes that had once noticed altered shipping coordinates. A massive water valve stood beside the old machinery. One rusted wheel. One fractured pressure gauge. She understood immediately. Without making a sound, Emily forced the valve open. Decades of trapped water exploded through the chamber. The violent surge slammed both guards into the wall, swept the remote detonator across the flooded floor, and carried Noah's chair within Emily's reach. She pulled him free just as Damian and Marcus burst through the opposite entrance. Above them, the ballroom trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling. The explosives had failed to detonate. Victoria slowly stepped backward into another corridor, smiling with unsettling calm. "You saved them," she said. Her eyes settled on Emily. "But you still don't know who your mother really was." Then she disappeared into the darkness. The echo of Victoria's footsteps faded into silence, but her words refused to leave Emily's mind. Damian wrapped an arm around Noah and guided him safely through the flooded tunnel while emergency teams secured the mansion above. Minutes later, Marcus reported that Elias Knight had been arrested trying to flee the estate. Several of his closest allies surrendered without resistance after the Black Ledger was recovered. The conspiracy that had poisoned the Knight family for decades was finally collapsing. Yet Emily could think of only one question. Who had her mother really been? 2 days later, Damian and Emily visited a federal archive where investigators had reopened every sealed Hayes International file. An elderly prosecutor carried a single weathered folder into the room. "I believe this belongs to your family." Inside were original audit reports signed by Emily's mother. She had never been a housekeeper for Hayes International. She had been a senior financial investigator working undercover with federal authorities, gathering evidence against a network that stretched through corporations, politicians, and organized crime. When she refused to falsify her findings, Elias and the Hayes organization destroyed her reputation instead. False criminal charges forced her into hiding, protecting both the investigation and her young daughter. Tears filled Emily's eyes. My whole life, she carried that alone. Damian gently closed the file, so you could grow up free. Weeks later, the courtroom was packed as Elias Knight, Richard Hayes, Victoria Hayes, and their remaining partners faced justice. The recovered ledger, the financial records, and Emily's mother's original reports left little room for denial. Years of lies ended with guilty verdicts instead of whispered rumors. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited beneath bright afternoon sunlight. This time, the cameras were different. No accusations, only respect. Emily received a public award for the courage that exposed one of the largest criminal conspiracies in New York's history. That evening, the Knight estate felt peaceful for the first time. Children laughed in the gardens. Noah chased fireflies across the lawn. Damian walked beside Emily beneath strings of warm lights. "Our marriage began with a lie," he said quietly. He reached into his pocket and revealed a simple ring. "I'd like the next one to begin with the truth." Emily smiled through happy tears. Yes. As family and friends applauded around them, she realized the greatest treasure she had uncovered was never hidden inside a ledger. It was the life they had chosen to build together. After everything Emily endured, it wasn't the truth inside the files that changed her future. It was finally finding someone who chose to stand beside her without asking her to prove her worth again. Real trust is built through actions, not promises. Damian didn't earn Emily's heart with power or words, but by standing beside her when the truth finally came to light and giving her the respect she had deserved all along. Today, think about someone in your life who has been quietly proving their loyalty through actions instead of speeches. If someone has stood by you the way Emily stood by Damian, don't let another day pass without letting them know how much they truly matter. Have you ever had someone believe in you when almost no one else did? I'd love to hear your story in the comments. And if this journey stayed with you until the very end, there's another unforgettable story waiting for you in the next video.